Hey everyone, I don't know how much longer my battery life will remain on here before I have to charge it, but I wanted to talk about something. I've read numerous journals and reviews and stuff by Tor-Chan and Mixfan 8643, aka the Media Man. Think that's what his name was. And they've all basically expressed how they felt about the Sonic comic. It's good points, it's bad points. But when I hear them talking about Worlds Unite, and they're doing a collaboration, so it's the first part of 3 parts, maybe 4. When I read this collaboration, they have a right, like all of us, they have a right to their opinions, and quite honestly, they have a right to say how they feel about how certain things were done in the comic, especially in the first act. There were certain things that they pointed out that they felt were not necessarily needed, or shouldn't have been done, or shouldn't have been even thought of or suggested. One lingering problem to them is Styx from Sonic Boom. Like, why in the world does Styx need to be in this crossover? Well, there was one thing that Mega Beatman said at the end of his review. Mega Beatman said at the end of his review of Part 12, and I'm sure he's going to address it in his conclusion video of the World Unite crossover in a day and a half here on YouTube. But he mentioned something about executive meddling. And obviously that was the case. And it wasn't just executive meddling from then, and I guess on and off now, editor Paul Kaminsky. It was executive meddling from all parties, Sega and Capcom involved. And Mixfan and Torin, or TA, that's exactly why this crossover was the way it was. It was executive meddling. People were coming up and telling Ian Flynn and anybody else that was working on the crossover, hey, you need to do this, you need to add that, you should do this, you should do that, and not letting them do it in a way that makes a crossover, at least a follow-up crossover to Worlds Collide, more sensible and enjoyable. Now, you did bring up some good things. You did say there's some good points here. Like Sigma himself is treated as a very imposing badass villain. Someone that's smart enough to realize when he's been duped. So, you brought up, like I said, you brought up some good points, but the good was outweighed by the bad, because you definitely saw a lot of bad there. You pointed out, why was Team Dark just inserted in to be killed off? Again, it goes back to executive meddling. That's what it is, my friends. Mixfan, Tor-Chan. That's exactly what it is. Executive meddling. It's basically, to give you an example, currently right now, if you're not into reading spoilers or anything, currently right now, airing on Destination America, you have the TNA Impact Wrestling show, and TNA itself involved in another invasion storyline, but this time against a legit wrestling promotion in GFW. The ironicness about it is GFW was founded by the same person that co-founded TNA, and that's Jeff Jarrett. Now, these episodes have already been taped, put in the can, edited, and basically finalized to be aired. Now, the reason I bring this up is because you would think something this big, this important as a storyline, would get better treatment and be extended to at least the WrestleMania pay-per-view of TNA, and that's Bound for Glory in October. But unfortunately, due to behind-the-scenes situations, executive meddling, if you will, between TNA creative head writer and booker John Gaborick and the co-founder Jeff Jarrett of GFW, not being able to decide and agree on how this invasion should be booked and what direction it should go in, the invasion wrapped up apparently before Bound for Glory takes place. And it wrapped up with a lethal lockdown, basically an enclosed 6 sides of steel cage match inside the 6-sided ring. Thus, spoilers, TNA wins. Thus, GFW is done. Not as a company, but GFW is done invading their company. Basically, TNA has won the battle, won the war. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what does this have to do with what happened with Worlds Unite? Basically, what it has to do with it is the fact, what it has to do with it in comparison is the fact that the GFW TNA invasion storyline had a lot of potential if egos and executive meddling and disagreements were not involved and would have just gone in a direction that would have made this more potential and could have drug it out to Bound for Glory. The reason I mention this in comparison to Worlds Unite, my friends, is because if it wasn't for that executive meddling on Worlds Unite by Paul Kaminsky and other outside sources, like say maybe the Capcom and Sega representatives, and even Capcom and Sega themselves, this story would have had the potential to be something good. This crossover would have had the potential to be something good. Could have gone in a direction that people would have enjoyed. True, it would have had its good and bad points, as you like to point out in your reviews, Tori-chan. It would have. But, in a sense, in my opinion, I think the good would have evened out with the bad. And you might have had some neutral moments, like, okay, this was good, but it also was bad, so I'm kind of like in between with it. But that's why I used that TNA GFW thing as an example. You know, both basically had executive meddling that caused potential good storylines to go down the toilet. So that is why, my friends, Worlds Unite failed in your eyes and in the eyes of many as a crossover. Another thing I know you're going to point out is the overcrowdedness. I know you're going to point that out as we get into the second act, especially the third act. You're going to say, why are these characters here? I'll explain that. You see, when you get to your archive binging of those two parts, you're going to mention that. I know Mega Beatman's going to mention that in his conclusion. But the reason being that those characters were there, I said it best in my overall review, my 4-part overall review, and I even did a text version you could read here on DeviantArt. I even did a text version you could read here on DeviantArt. The reason those characters were brought in was kind of like, well, it's kind of like if you go back to Transformers. If you watch the special interview that was done, the special interview that was done with Flint Dille for the Rhino home video release of Transformers G1, Flint said in that interview that every time a new toy was brought out, that toy not only had to be featured in some way, basically long story short, he said anytime a new Transformer was brought out, mostly an Autobot figure was brought out, that Autobot not only had to be featured in the show, but had to have a hero moment. Even if later on, let's say in the same episode that they have the hero moment, they get smacked around, they have to have that hero moment. They got to show off what they do. And even with the villains, the Decepticons, when a new Decepticon would show up, they would have to show how destructive they are. They would have to show how badass they are, and how powerful they are, and how evil they can be. A good example of this is Six-Shot in part 1 of the finale to G1, Rebirth. the American version, that is. He basically showed off every transformation he had, showing how powerful and badass he is. And that is why you had these characters show up. You had these characters, each video game franchise, either a Capcom or a Sega one, show up and have, in the debut, have a hero moment. Basically have the moment to show off what they could do, who they were about, and then that's it. Because later on, we see Sigma, and you guys are going to probably point this out as well, just smacking them around like they're nothing. But at least they had a hero moment. And that's why they were brought in. Not just because Capcom and Sega wanted the crossover to be bigger and badder and all that, along with Paul Kaminsky. They were brought in basically to show off who the characters were, introduce these characters and franchises to a new generation, as well as probably reintroduce them. To the older generation, like I said, as well as introducing them to the new generation, but also that they could have a hero moment. That's why they were brought in. And again, that's all due to executive meddling. Overall, TA, Mixed Fan, that's exactly what this was all about. That's exactly why in your eyes, and in the eyes of many other fans, this was a mixed bag, as well as somewhat of a failure because of the executive meddling. So hopefully that answered your questions, my friends. Let me know what you two think, and anybody else watching this, let me know what you guys think down below. Do you agree with this or not?